we just had SEC Media Days last week. We saw SEC Media Days go down. I believe it was in Columbus, Georgia, but that's not exactly the point. The big thing that happened in SEC Media Day that at least garnered the attention of ESPN themselves is, Lane Kiffin, he gave his thoughts about NIL. He gave his thoughts about the transfer portal as well, and really just talking into the overall state of college football. And in doing so, he didn't even wait for those types of questions to be asked upon him. He went right into it in the opening statement. And if you want to see the full thing in the full context, I'll make sure to link it either in the description, or I'll have it as the comment down below for this video as well. But he talked about NIL, and what Wayne Kiffin said, I agreed with some things, and I disagreed with some things as well. We'll put it like that. We talked about NIL in the previous podcast, and I guess how we differ from what Wayne Kiffin wanted to say about NIL is, he sees as a more negative aspect of college football. And, we see it as a little bit more of a positive light. And without jumping too terribly far into the NIL stuff, of course, that we dove into. And if you want to check out that podcast segment, there'll be a link somewhere in this video that you guys can check out at your later convenience, of course. But generally speaking, I still think that NIL can be a positive thing for college football. I think it'd be something that could add more parity in the long term, because we're still only a couple years into this thing. We don't know the full ramifications of NIL until 5-10 years from now. But just me speaking in general terms, the best way a student athlete can get NIL money is that they're actually starting, they're actually contributing at the college level. And it's easier to do that at some of these lesser schools than maybe what you would get at a traditional blue blood, where typically as a true freshman, as a freshman redshirt, you're not starting. You might have to wait a year or two before that actually happens, at least for most athletes. But at a smaller school, that might not be the case. And I think it really could be the great equalizer. But more importantly, he talked about the transfer portal. And he talked about the transfer portal and talked about how essentially it's treated as if it's free agency. And the way that the NCAA rules are structured, I think they went a little bit too lenient on it. In my opinion, it's something that I always talk to my friends, my family, my coworkers about in terms of the transfer portal. So in the past, what would happen with the transfer portal is, what you would have happen is, regardless of circumstances in terms of why you would go ahead and transfer, you would, no matter what happens, no matter what the reason is, you would have to sit out for a full season. You would lose a year of eligibility, but then after you sit out that year, you'll be eligible to play at your new school. But so then after that, I think it was a few years ago, the NCAA introduced a waiver where you would be eligible to play immediately. And it's gotten to a point where almost everyone that transfers is eligible immediately, unless there's a grades issue, like certain classes don't transfer over. So nowadays, you could transfer as many times as you want, and you could play immediately. The person that I think about a lot when I think of why maybe the transfer portal needs a little bit of change is JT Daniels. JT Daniels was somebody who started his career at USC, didn't pan out in his first 2 years at USC, where he actually was number 3 quarterback in the 2018 recruiting class. He was in the same recruiting class as Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. But for JT Daniels, it doesn't work out. He ends up transferring to Georgia. He was the starting quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs. That was a thing that did actually happen. And he couldn't stay on the field. He got hurt in those 2 years that he was at Georgia. Stetson Bennett took over, and, well, the rest is history with the Georgia football program. So after those 2 years at Georgia, he then transfers to West Virginia last season. Well, things didn't quite work out at West Virginia either. At the University of West Virginia, he ends up getting benched in the middle of the season as well. So now he enters the transfer portal. This would make it his 4th school in 6 years of college eligibility, because he got a medical redshirt year, and then he also got the COVID year because he was participating in college athletics in 2020. JT Daniels is now at Rice. He is now a member of the Rice Owls football team. So, and I think that's a perfect example why I do agree with Lane Kiffin in terms of maybe restructuring the transfer portal a little bit, right? Because listen, my father always told me two of the biggest decisions that you make is where you end up going to college. If you do decide to go to college, of course, college is of course not for everybody, and who you decide to go marry. Well, in respect to the former, in terms of where you end up going to college, those kids that are making decisions, they're just that. They're kids. They're 17 years old. Some of them make their decision earlier, 15, 16 years old. You get the picture. They're kids either way that don't have fully developed brains. And just like all of us that is listening in or is even recording this particular podcast right now, we all make mistakes. None of us is perfect. So I don't want to say that you want to go back to the original NCAA transfer rules where you do have to sit out a year. I think that we should still give kids grace where if you don't like where you are, where you originally decide to spend your next 4 or 5 years, you should be able to transfer to wherever you want to go, regardless of whether it's in the same conference or not. And you should be able to still play immediately, at least the first time around. Now, after the first time, if you want to get to that second time or even later, then yes, I would absolutely advocate for having athletes sit out a year. I think that would help some with some of the turbulence that we see with the transfer portal. Who knows if the NCAA actually goes that route because they have very little power nowadays. But I think that alleviates some of the concerns that we have with the transfer portal that many of these coaches have, and also try to enforce better rules in terms of making sure that athletes are not being contacted until they actually are in the transfer portal. Because Coach Nardizzi of Pitt, he mentioned, I believe the story was mentioned on the Wake Kick Show with Josh Pate. He mentioned that straight up Jordan Addison, who is now a wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, he was straight up tampered with. He called out USC because of that. So I think that would be something that the NCAA absolutely should look forward to. Probably won't see anything less than 30 days from college football season starting, but going into next offseason, I think the NCAA should absolutely look into that. And that's with all sports. That's not just with football. I think that's something that they should certainly look into for all college athletics.